Do you know that 800 hours local time, the steel-gray sky over the frozen waters near Greenland, shattered under the thunder of jet engines as the U.S. Navy's Second Fleet shifted into its highest level of combat readiness? An astonishing and almost unthinkable development, one that caught global intelligence off guard, was unfolding in real time. French President Emmanuel Macron, reportedly in a surge of fury, ordered France's ultimate naval asset, the nuclear-powered French aircraft carrier Charles de Gaulle, to spearhead a full-carrier strike group directly into what Washington considered a U.S. military exclusion zone. The objective was unmistakable: apply military pressure and signal that America's increasingly assertive push to dominate this strategic Arctic territory had crossed a line. The United States, under President Donald Trump and his hardline second-term doctrine, was never going to tolerate a challenge in what it views as its own sphere of influence. The moment NORAD's early warning systems flagged the French fleet's emissions, the U.S. Second Fleet, led by the supercarrier USS Gerald R. Ford, snapped to general quarters. The massive strike group surged forward to intercept, projecting unmistakable force. Tensions spiked to extraordinary levels. The world braced for what looked like the unimaginable open confrontation between two of the West's oldest allies. Yet just as the crisis seemed ready to spiral, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt delivered a chillingly composed statement. European troops, she said, would not influence the president's decisions, nor alter Washington's objective regarding Greenland. The message was cold, direct, and dismissive. But immediately after that declaration, something happened that even the most seasoned strategists in Moscow could not have foreseen. Instead of celebrating fractures within NATO, Russia's general staff issued a full red alert across its northern fleet. Why would a confrontation between the U.S. and France push Moscow to panic, so far as ordering nuclear submarines to prepare emergency withdrawal procedures? Did Russian radar pick up something far more alarming than a carrier group? Or was the entire world staring at the most elaborate military deception of the century? The reality behind this fleet movement was far stranger and far more calculated than it first appeared. And it all began with a dangerous overconfidence. The Arctic waters churned violently as the French strike group, centered on the Charles de Gaulle, entered the Davis Strait with striking boldness. U.S. electronic intelligence noted that the French ships made no effort to mask their presence. Fire control radars operated at full output, continuously scanning American defense installations in Greenland. Dassault Rafale M fighters screamed overhead, executing aggressive flybys near U.S. early warning stations. This was not subtle signaling. It was strategic theater at maximum intensity. Macron's gamble was clear: force Washington to reconsider its posture by demonstrating that without European alignment, the U.S. would face instability in the Arctic. Yet even more unsettling than the overt aggression was the electromagnetic and acoustic chaos generated by the fleet. Instead of maintaining emissions control, French vessels blasted wideband transmissions and ran active sonar at high power, hammering the ocean floor with relentless acoustic pulses. To conventional observers, it looked reckless, like a battlefield shout meant to intimidate. But beneath the surface, that very noise created something else entirely: concealment. Russia, watching from the edges of the confrontation, identified what it believed was a once-in-a-generation opening. While NATO forces generated a storm of electromagnetic and acoustic interference, Moscow saw an opportunity to execute a bold and covert maneuver. Washington's response to Paris was clinical and uncompromising. The press secretary's remarks were not mere rhetoric. They signaled operational intent. U.S. Northern Command activated a containment strategy anchored by the USS Gerald R. Ford, a $13 billion flagship equipped with the revolutionary electromagnetic aircraft launch system. From its deck, Boeing EA-18G Growler jets launched in coordinated waves, each armed with next-generation jamming pods. Within minutes, a dense electronic shield enveloped the operational zone. The electromagnetic spectrum over southern Greenland was saturated. The U.S. initiated a full noise barrage protocol, flooding communications and radar frequencies with overwhelming interference. Surveillance screens across multiple countries flickered into static. Satellite feeds were disrupted. The region effectively transformed into an information void, an operational black hole controlled by the Pentagon. Meanwhile, U.S. Arleigh Burke-class destroyers advanced aggressively into the French formation, executing high-speed, head-on maneuvers at 30 knots. Gun mounts rotated, fire control systems locked onto opposing vessels, and tension tightened across every bridge and combat information center. Below the surface, the chaos intensified. Active sonar from both navies clashed violently, reverberating off ice shelves and underwater cliffs. The resulting acoustic clutter produced endless phantom echoes, exactly the type of environment Russia had studied for years. Seizing the moment, Russia's Northern Fleet commander deployed two of its most advanced assets, the Yasen M-class nuclear attack submarines Kazan and Novosibirsk. Known for near-silent propulsion and armed with three M22 Zircon hypersonic missiles, these vessels were designed to exploit confusion. Moscow's strategy was simple yet audacious. Use NATO's acoustic storm as camouflage, slip through the Guyuk Gap, and position within striking distance of the U.S. East Coast. Russian reconnaissance satellites relayed confident updates to Moscow. The submarines appeared to be moving undetected, their pump jet systems masked by the roar of carrier operations. At 200 hours on January 18th, the Kazan increased speed to 20 knots, a calculated risk to accelerate their transit. The captain believed he was orchestrating the strategic deception of the century, exploiting Western distraction to reposition a nuclear threat closer to American shores. But in that confidence lay a fatal miscalculation. The very noise they trusted as cover was, in fact, the trap designed specifically to destroy them. At precisely 15:30 hours, the situation shifted so fast that Russian electronic warfare teams couldn't adjust in time. On the Link 16 tactical data network, the encrypted frequencies of the French fleet suddenly synchronized flawlessly with the U.S. Navy's Naval Integrated Fire Control System. In that instant, the illusion collapsed. There had never been a civil war. The dramatic deployments, the aggressive maneuvers, the public tension, every piece of it was a coordinated performance with one objective: force Russia's submarine fleet out into the open. Washington and Paris understood something critical. The Yasen M-class submarine was so advanced, so quiet, that traditional passive anti-submarine tracking methods were nearly useless. To catch it, they had to compel it to move fast and guide it into a controlled corridor. The French fleet's loud posture and aggressive sonar pulses were not reckless. They were bait. The overwhelming acoustic chaos on the surface pushed the Russian submarines to dive deeper, searching desperately for the rare silent channels where they believed they could slip through unnoticed. What Moscow didn't realize was that those so-called quiet corridors were pre-selected kill zones. This is where the truth behind the so-called small force finally came to light. Media reports claimed France deployed just 15 combat personnel. That was technically accurate, but deeply misleading. These were not ordinary troops. They were elite, underwater acoustic warfare specialists, covertly inserted by U.S. helicopters onto Arctic ice floes directly along the projected Russian transit route. Working in brutal conditions, the 15-man team drilled through thick ice sheets and lowered ultra-sensitive passive hydrophones into the freezing depths. They built a temporary but highly effective underwater sensor grid. So when the Russian submarines accelerated to exploit the chaos and push through the Guyuk Gap, their pump jet propulsion, nearly silent under normal conditions, echoed through the narrow underwater channels like a drumbeat. To the trained ears of the French acoustic experts, it was unmistakable. Within moments, the exact coordinates of the Kazan and Novosibirsk were transmitted to the Second Fleet's Naval Operations Center. The hunters had become the hunted. At 1600 hours, the coalition decided to end the performance. They would cripple the Northern Fleet's pride without firing a single live missile. 3 U.S. Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, joined by a French Horizon-class frigate, maneuvered into precise positions. At extremely close range, they aimed their active sonar arrays directly at the submerged Russian hulls and activated maximum power active ping mode. In water, an excellent conductor of sound, this was not just detection. It was pressure warfare. The acoustic blast reached intensities of up to 240 decibels against the submarine hulls. The sound waves struck the steel like repeated seismic shocks, generating violent resonance through the structure. Inside the Kazan and Novosibirsk, chaos erupted. Crew members reportedly clutched their heads as the penetrating sonar pulses reverberated through compartments. Sensitive electronic systems and sonar receivers experienced signal overload. Circuits strained under the acoustic assault. And then came the psychological blow. A U.S. Boeing P-8 Poseidon roared low over the waves, releasing 4 training torpedoes in rapid succession. They splashed into the water and maneuvered deliberately around the Russian submarines, locking them in a simulated kill box. The whirring of torpedo propellers in the water below was unmistakable, target locked. The Russian commanders faced an impossible choice. If they dove deeper, The sustained sonar barrage risked further damaging their sensory systems. If they launched missiles, escalation would be immediate and catastrophic. Under crushing physical strain and immense psychological pressure, both submarines executed the humiliating emergency blow procedure. Ballast tanks vented. The massive vessels broke the surface, exposed under the watchful lenses of NATO reconnaissance aircraft. It was an unspoken admission. The mission had failed. But the consequences went far beyond embarrassment. Every acoustic detail, the unique sound signature that made the Yasin M-class so feared, had been captured and recorded by the underwater sensor grid deployed by those 15 specialists. From that moment forward, Russia's most prized naval deterrent was no longer an invisible black hole in the ocean. It had a profile, a pattern, a fingerprint. And then came the final revelation. After the operation concluded, satellite analysis confirmed something astonishing. The French aircraft carrier Charles de Gaulle had never been there at all. The radar image Russia interpreted as a full carrier strike group was an elaborate electronic deception. Decoy signatures mounted on Danish support vessels, combined with sophisticated cyber and electronic warfare simulations, had created a phantom fleet. France's only true physical presence in the decisive phase of the operation, 15 specialists on Arctic ice. Russia had mobilized two of its most valuable strategic assets to confront what turned out to be an illusion, and was outmaneuvered by a team small enough to fit inside a single transport aircraft. So now the question shifts to you. After such a calculated blow, will Moscow absorb the setback quietly? Or is it preparing a subtler, potentially more devastating counter? Perhaps targeting satellite networks or cyber infrastructure instead of fleets? And what about the US-France partnership? Was this a durable strategic alignment, or merely a temporary convergence of interests? Share your analysis in the comments. If this breakdown uncovered one of the most sophisticated military deceptions of the modern era, make sure to like the video, subscribe, and enable notifications. Thank you for watching.